All right, let's talk about factorial designs. Before we get started, let's think about what makes a piece of research a factorial design. What's the thing that sets factorial designs separate from simple designs? Do you remember? Go ahead and jot it down or say it out loud. The definition of factorial designs is that they have more than one predictor variable. So we're going to be looking at the effect of two predictor variables on an outcome. We're going to be asking whether each variable has an effect on its own. So we're going to say, does variable A have a main effect? We're going to say, does variable B have a main effect? And then we're going to ask, what sort of relationship do these two variables share? Does predictor variable A and B interact with each other? Or do predictor variable A and B share an additive relationship? So those are the three questions we're going to be asking. Main effect of the first variable, main effect of the second variable, and then what sort of relationship do they share? And the possible answers there are either they share an interaction or they share an additive relationship. We're going to look at a particular example where there's an interaction. So we're going to explore a paper that was published in 2017 asking about whether mindfulness meditation increases empathy. So they're asking, I wonder what effect meditation has. When you meditate, are you more aware of other people? That's going to be the basic question. Let's define these variables. So meditation is a practice or an art where participants are becoming aware of the present moment and relaxing. Particularly mindfulness meditation often involves asking people to focus on their breathing, and while they're being aware of what they're thinking about or aware of what's going on around them, to just notice it, but not to really get involved in it. And so that mindfulness meditation is going to be one of the predictor variables in this study. And they're interested in the question of, I wonder if meditation would make people more aware of how other people feel. I wonder if the participants who have spent a few minutes meditating would then be more in tune with other people. That idea of being in tune with other people, we call that empathy. So it's understanding and feeling what another person is experiencing. It's identifying, seeing things from their point of view. So let's start just by discussing a simple experiment with one predictor variable and one outcome variable. I wonder if meditation has an impact on empathy. Our operational definitions: mindfulness meditation, we're going to randomly assign our participants either to spend 5 minutes focusing on their breathing and conducting some mindfulness meditation exercises, or we're going to ask our participants to spend 5 minutes sitting quietly and relaxing with no specific instructions on how to do that. So we've got an independent variable. It's independent because we've manipulated it. We are assigning these participants to these two different conditions. And so this is going to be the meditation condition, whether they're engaging in mindfulness meditation or whether they're just relaxing. Our outcome variable, empathy, the way that these researchers defined that was they used a task called reading the mind in the eye. And so the participants were shown black and white pictures of just right around the eye region of people displaying emotions, and were asked to identify what emotion they were showing. Now, they were given just 4 options for each one, so that it was a multiple choice test. They would be able to get some of them right just by guessing. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So here, can you see what this person might be feeling? Which of those 4 seems to be the best description of what that person is feeling? And how about this one? Which of those 4 would be the best description of how that person is feeling? So here are their results. They've looked at the group that was asked to use mindfulness meditation. There were 54 people in that group. And the group that were in the just relaxation, there were 53 people in that group. And then they've got their mean empathy score. Boy, those numbers look pretty close together, don't they? 25.89 and 25.45. There doesn't seem to be much of a difference between those two means. It seems like any difference there could be easily accounted for just by random error or fluctuation. If we look at the graph for those, again, we can see, boy, they're really right on top of each other. Now, as we move through the quarter, we'll have the statistical tools that will allow us to conclude, is this a real difference or not? For right now, then this is not a real difference. So they did not find a real difference between the meditation condition and the mean empathy score. Boy, isn't that kind of surprising? Mindfully meditating didn't make the participants more able to empathize or adopt another person's point of view. That was the simple experiment with just one predictor variable. But the researchers thought that maybe there was something else going on, and maybe they just couldn't see the effect that mindfulness meditation has on empathy, because there were other predictor variables that were getting in the way, that those two groups had enough other individual differences that it washed out any effect of the meditation. And so they're asking these questions. Perhaps mindfulness does increase empathy for some people, but not for others. Because we've got all of those participants lumped together, we can't see the effect. What if we could identify another predictor variable that would allow us to separate out those participants into those that do show an increase in empathy after meditation and those that do not? Can you think of some possible variables? I mean, here are some. Maybe gender predicts this. Maybe men and women react differently on empathy after meditation. Maybe age predicts it. Maybe the culture someone comes from. Maybe if someone's on the autism spectrum. Maybe there are other aspects of people's personalities that would help us predict this. So what this study looked at particularly, they chose one element of personality to see if they could tease out any additional differences in that group. So the personality dimension that they chose was that of narcissism. One of my colleagues, Amber, is here with me, and she's going to help us discuss narcissism, and she's also going to help us discuss the results.
Narcissism refers to how self-involved you are, so how much you think about yourself as opposed to other people.
So that's the concept of narcissism. We need to operationally define that, and the way these researchers chose to do that, the predictor variable of narcissism, is that they asked the participants to respond to 16 items, self-report, and for each item there was a pair of statements, one of which was a narcissistic leaning statement and one was a non-narcissistic leaning statement. They're going to force them to choose between those two. And chances are most everyone would feel a little bit either way and not really want to answer either one of those. This is a forced choice alternative task. The reason that we use forced choice alternatives is so that we can eliminate the fence sitting, I'm always just going to say, oh, I'm somewhere in the middle. And so the participants need to choose between A or B. And then to score this scale, the researchers would count up how many of the narcissistic statements the participants endorsed. Those that were higher than the group average, those that endorsed more than the average, were classified as high on the narcissistic trait, and those that were lower than the group average were classified as low on the narcissistic trait. So let's look at some of their results now. So here's the raw data. As you can see, we've got it written out with the meditation variable along the top, so whether they were in the meditation group or not, and then the narcissism group along the side, whether they were in the low narcissistic group or the high narcissistic group. And those are the rounded off mean scores, just so they could fit on the board.
We have two predictor variables, meditation and narcissism. And they wanted to know whether these two variables might influence level of empathy. Now let's start by looking at the main effects. Let's start by looking at meditation. So this is a case where we are actually overlooking level of narcissism. We're just focusing on the variable for meditation, and we want to know if there is a difference between people who meditated and people who did not. So in this case, we look at the average here, and we have 25.89. And the average of people who did not meditate, which would be 25.45.
Excuse me, Amber, let me just interrupt for a second. I just want to talk about the concept of inferential statistics. At this point, we're trying to discuss the hypotheses and the definitions and the interpretations and the conclusions without getting too bogged down in the statistics and the numbers, because there's a lot about these concepts that you need to start getting familiar with before we get into the numbers and the statistics, because I know that scares some of you. But what we're going to do is just talk about the concepts. And so we're asking, is this a real difference? We see that there's a little bit of a difference between these groups, but is it big enough to be a real difference? Now, once we talk about inferential statistics, you will know that there is a calculation that allows us to decide if we're seeing a real difference or if we're just seeing random noise, if any difference that we can see is just due to noise. I know it's kind of training you in bad habits, but I think it's very valuable to be able to use your eyes and to reason about how much of a difference must there be in order for two groups to have a real difference. So if the data looked like this, where we had one mean around 22 and one mean around 31, and the distributions that's based on how large the standard deviations are, looked roughly like that, I think we would all be able to agree, wow, there's no way those two groups are the same. Those are different groups. On this variable, those are two samples drawn from different populations. However, if we saw a pattern like this, which is more like what we've got, where the means, the averages are really close together, and the standard deviations show that there would be a whole lot of overlap, I think we could all agree that it's really likely that that is simply two samples drawn from the same population. And so there's not a real difference there.
So when we look at these two values, they look pretty similar. So this is a case where there is no main effect of meditation. But now if we look at the main effect of narcissism, what we want to do there is actually overlook people who meditated or not and focus on just whether they are high in narcissism or low in narcissism. So here, looking at the average for people who are low, we get 26.5. And for people who are high in narcissism, we have 25.5. So this is a case where the means look pretty different. And actually, we have a main effect of narcissism. So what this means is that people who are high in narcissism are different than people who are low in narcissism on our empathy variable. Like people who are high are actually less empathetic than people who are low in narcissism. But now we want to look at a potential interaction. This is a case where we don't collapse over anything. We want to look at our cell means for all of this. So we have an average of 28 for people who are low in narcissism who did meditate, an average of 25 for people who are low in narcissism who did not meditate. We see that for people who are high in narcissism, we have an average of 24 for people who did meditate and who are high in narcissism, and 27 for those who did not meditate and who are high in narcissism. So now we need to graph that out. So let's start with this first cell here. So we have low in narcissism, and yes, they did meditate. So that would be 28. So low, 28. And let's just focus on the people who meditated. So we're comparing low to high. So our next cell would be 24. So for people high, we would go to 24. And that is our line for people who meditated.
So looking at that line that Amber just drew, we're looking at the group that was assigned to meditate. Does the relationship between narcissism and empathy look like it's a positive relationship or a negative relationship or no relationship? How would you decide that? And as narcissism increases, empathy is decreasing, right? So that looks like it's a negative relationship.
Now moving on to our next line, we are looking at people who did not meditate. So people who were low scored a 25. So that would be about here. And people who were high scored about a 27. So that would be about here.
And now when we look at the line that Amber has drawn, and we ask, all right, when we're thinking about the group that was assigned to relax, not meditate, does the relationship between narcissism and empathy look like a positive relationship, a negative relationship, or no relationship? When they were just assigned to relax, as narcissism increases, so does empathy. So that's describing a positive relationship. One of the basic sentences that we say when the two predictor variables share an interaction is the effect of variable A on the outcome differs depending on the level of variable B. Let's listen to Amber say that with these variable labels in there.
So what we're seeing here is that these lines are not parallel. What this is telling us is that the effect of meditation on empathy is different depending on whether a person is high or low in narcissism. So it's not just meditation, it's also narcissism that is influencing a person's overall empathy score here.
Now, this example was about an interaction. If we'd seen an additive effect, we would have used a sentence more like, the effect of variable A on the outcome is the same, regardless of the level of variable B. We would have seen that the different groups really shared the same pattern, that the lines looked roughly parallel. Here's the actual results from that study. So they're confirming that there was an interaction between narcissism and meditation condition on mind reading accuracy. And here's how they discuss that in their paper. Listen for the same sort of discussion that you've been hearing in class and with Amber. There was a significant interaction between narcissistic traits and meditation condition on mind reading accuracy. And then they're giving a big, long, ugly, statistical looking thing that's telling you why they're able to say that, why they're able to draw that conclusion. The first bit there, and we're going to talk about this more later, but let me just tell you what it looks like, what it means. The first thing there, the letter F, is telling you that they calculated a statistic that's called an F, and it had the parameters 2 and 152, and that was equal to something. It was a calculation and it equaled 8.17. Now this next bit you recognize, right? P is less than 0.001. So right now, all we want you to hold on to is if P is less than 0.05, that means we're looking at a real difference. That means that this is a real relationship. So this was a real interaction. And then here is how they interpreted that interaction. Compared with the relaxation condition, the mindfulness exercise increased mind reading accuracy in the non-narcissistic participants, but decreased mind reading accuracy in the narcissistic participants. So they're comparing it to the relaxation, the kind of the control condition, and saying mindfulness increased empathy for non-narcissistic participants compared to the control. Mindfulness decreased empathy for the narcissistic participants. I hope this is really helping you understand and get the vocabulary around factorial designs.